Hi everyone, welcome back to another Father TED Talks. Again, a pre-recorded one. Sorry, I know it's been a few weeks since our last episode. It's just been so super crazy in the last few weeks because as the churches have been reopening slowly and the full lockdown has kind of passed now. Obviously, we had a lot of baptisms and weddings that were postponed during the COVID lockdown, and now everybody is rebooking. So we have a lot of sacraments, a lot of baptisms, and it's just been super, super crazy, especially on the weekends, which is when usually we record the Father TED Talk. So this episode is going to be a little bit shorter, probably maybe 25 to half an hour. I only have about 4 questions that have come in through our Father TED Talks at Gmail. So I'm going to answer those, and I shouldn't take very, very long. And then hopefully we'll have some more in the next upcoming weeks, and we can do another show. So I'll just get right to it for our questions. The first one that came through a couple of weeks ago is, Father, I just saw that fish is really not permitted to be eaten most Wednesdays and Fridays. I always was under the impression that it was okay except for certain fasting periods. Maybe this is one that can be talked about as a reminder or refresher. So yeah. So when we talk about the fast, the most basic fast, we've spoken about this before. Of course, fasting is a matter of each individual as far as how much they can do of the rule of fasting, and in conjunction with consultation with their spiritual father or their parish priest. Of course, we've said before that it is not good for people who have never fasted before to kind of just jump in and try to do the full fast according to every single rule. But if we talk about the ideal fast, the ideal fast, if we do if we follow all the rules, is pretty much vegan. So that means no meat of any kind and no dairy. And when we say no meat, it means no animal with blood in it, right? This, of course, does allow for like shellfish and things like that, invertebrates, because they don't have any blood. So like shrimp, lobster, the crab, things like that, which do not have blood in them. But as far as whole fish, that's part of the meat category. Poultry, beef, all the other things, pork, all the other things that go under the meat category, right? So when we fast, if we're going to fast, I guess you could say fully to the fullest extent, it is no meat, no dairy, and in some days where it's really strict, there is no oil. And so yes, of course, fish would not be allowed. Now there are some exemptions during the year, like for example, when we're in the Great Fast of Lent, of Pascha. When we have March 25th, which is the Evangelismos, right? The Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. It is a happy feast that happens to find itself within the greater fasting of Lent. And so there are exemptions on that day where we are allowed to have wine and oil and also fish in some instances, right? So there are exemptions or certain tweaking of the fasting rule depending on great feast days that conflict with other kind of fasting periods. But generally speaking, the full fast is vegan. Now, of course, as I said, if you are not capable of doing that for medical reasons or for whatever other reason, speak to your spiritual father, speak to your parish priest, and he can kind of work with you to kind of tailor a fasting rule that works for you, but something that will allow you to progress spiritually and be able to have some type of spiritual exercise going on a weekly basis, Wednesday and Friday, and of course the Great Fast. So that's my answer for that one, and I hope I covered it. The second question is, what is our doctrinal stance on exorcism, and do we have an exorcism division like the Catholics? That's a great question. It's been a long time since somebody has asked me that one. So it's kind of interesting that we do not have an exorcism division or a unit or even a school of exorcists like the Roman Catholics do. Every priest in the Orthodox Church performs exorcisms. And when we say exorcism in the Orthodox Church, it's a much more broader term. It doesn't just mean, praying over somebody who's specifically demonically possessed, right? That's when we think of exorcism, we think of the movies, we think of, what we've seen in the media where somebody is possessed and, you have to bring in like a special person to kind of exorcise the demon out of them. Of course, that can be part of it in very kind of rare instances. Like, for example, I've been a priest for 13 years. I've never had, to exorcise somebody who's actually, violently demonically possessed. Whether somebody had demonic influences on them or not, and I never noticed it, or I prayed for them in passing, is a different story. But it's never like the movies, at least not in my experience so far, and thank God for that. But every priest performs exorcisms. We have many different types of prayers in different instances that ward off evil both external influences and internal influences, right? So for example, even in baptism, the first 3 prayers that are read for a child or for an adult in the back of the church by the narthex are prayers of exorcism. We are praying that there is nothing demonic and no negative spiritual influence on the child or the adult about to be baptized, and they're free of any kind of demonic influence. So those are exorcisms, but it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the person. It's just we are praying for the general spiritual well-being and the warding off of evil. That's a type of exorcism. We have, of course, Vascania, which is a type of exorcism for the warding off of the evil eye or spells or evil intentions of people. So we have that type of exorcism. And then, of course, we have more specific exorcisms like the prayers of St. Basil or St. Cyprian, where, it goes into a little more deeper, more serious situations. I guess you could say we even have like prayers of exorcism of homes. Like when we think there's something negative happening in a home, we do have even prayers for that to kind of, banish and to expel demonic activity from a home. So there's lots of different types of exorcisms, and every Orthodox priest is capable of reading them. Of course, every situation is different, and some situations are more severe than others. Some of them require us to speak to our spiritual fathers or to speak to our bishop. It's kind of like, think of it like when somebody's sick, right? So if somebody kind of has a cold, right? They usually don't really go to the doctor. They'll go to the pharmacy, and maybe the pharmacist will give them some advice. Here, take this cough medication, or take this kind of like, sinus medication or something like that. And they'll go home and they'll take it because it's like a milder malady, and the remedy is milder, and you don't really need that much consultation. But if you have a more serious disease, like for example, if you're suffering from cancer, you're suffering from some other type of more difficult disease, then you would go to more of an expert. That expert will probably consult with others to make sure that their diagnosis is correct. It's the same way in the spiritual world, that when you have more serious things, then of course we're sinners, we are flawed, we don't know everything, and we are weak as well. And so when there are more serious situations, we would speak to our spiritual fathers, we would speak to our bishop, we would have probably get multiple priests involved in a more serious situation, just for help, for advice, and also for prayer, so that, because all of us are flawed and all of us are weak, and corporate prayer is much more powerful than single prayer. So every situation is different, and that's how we approach it, very much like the medical community would approach, the diagnosis of different diseases and the severity, and of course the prescription that is given to each situation. So that is kind of like how kind of exorcism works in the Orthodox Church, and it's not really kind of it's neither downplayed nor is it played up as something like the serious thing, but rather it's just another part of our spiritual life. It's just another part of the pastoral role of a priest, and we try not to give too much attention to things to make them, I guess, worse, or I guess you say more, to give them more attention than they're worth, right? So because I think that's what the demons want us to do, right? So if we become fascinated with the demonic, then maybe we will be more involved with those things and call those things to ourselves. So we focus on Christ, we focus on our spiritual journey, and when we fall, we get back up again. And sometimes that requires prayers, whether it be from a priest or from each other. And of course, there are some severe cases. So that's all I can say, at least about exorcism in the Orthodox Church. The next question, the third one of the 4, is what is the correct way, Father, for a lay person to ask for a blessing when he or she is among a group of priests? Just ask the eldest priest or each priest. This is a little bit along the lines of something about... this question was kind of addressed partly in another episode where I was asked, I think it was last episode or 2 episodes ago, where I was asked about how do you refer to priests and bishops and patriarchs and things like that. But this one's asking about what is the protocol for asking for a blessing. Well, again, just don't overthink it. Usually when sometimes you don't know who the eldest is, or who has seniority, or presvia as we say in Greek. So it's not that important. If you know, out of respect, you go to the eldest, to the most senior, and you ask for their blessing first, and then so on. But a lot of times, if you just show up and there's a group of priests in a situation, you don't know, right? And or if there's a bishop, well, of course you would go get the bishop's blessing first, and then the other priests, right? Or if there is a higher monk, or if there is if there's somebody who's of higher rank and you know it, then of course you would ask for them first, and just out of respect. And it's like if I ever have like an elderly priest visiting in my parish. a bishop, of course, it's a given that everybody who comes in, my altar boys, everybody, they go to the bishop and they ask for his blessing first. But even if I have an older, more venerable priest, a priest who has more experience than me, a priest who I look up to, I'll tell you something, even a younger priest, I usually give seniority to them when they visit my church, but especially the elder ones. Always my altar boys come in, I tell them to go get a blessing first from the elder one. It's just a sign of respect for their years and for their wisdom and for the amount of time that they spend in prayer. So usually that's the case. But again, don't feel like you're gonna offend anybody. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. If we see a bunch of priests, we don't know who they are, and we don't know what the ranks are. We just ask for their blessings, or don't overthink it too much. It's okay. And the last question, wow, I just went right through these and we've only been at 10 minutes here. So the last question is, why is it so hard to find a priest to commune those who are dying? Often people call trying to find a priest when their loved one is at the end of life, and it is hard to find one to come. That's a really good question. So there's kind of a number of factors that I would like to address in this one. It is true that we as priests are on call a lot of times 24/7, it's like, and we should be available. And a lot of times we are. However, sometimes the reality is that, there are a lot of people and there are very few priests. And so I find that a lot of times, I do my best to, when somebody calls and there's an emergency, I try to go unless there's another emergency. But sometimes there are situations where I'm either out of town, or maybe I am across town at another hospital with another family, and then I have a conflict. So there's two people that need me at the same time, and then what I'll do is I do my best to find another priest to go and pray for that person, so that both people are at least ministered to. But what I think one of the overarching problems that exists in our kind of culture, and especially in the Greek culture, but I think generally in the Orthodox culture, is that when people are sick, we have we've attached this stigma to the priest visiting, and we think that when the priest visits someone who is sick, they're going to die. And this is a really, really bad stigma, and it's a really kind of bad kind of tradition we've fallen into, where we don't want to call the priest unless the person is on their deathbed. And that's really kind of the opposite of what the function of the priest is. The function of the priest and the function of the church as a whole is to remedy the soul, to help the human being in all stages of their lives, right? So when we give birth, we're supposed to call the priest. When we're sick, we call the priest. When we get married, we call the priest. Like all stages, we call the priest, and we ask for the blessings of the church and the presbytery. And in the same way, when we first get sick, we should be calling the priest so that he can come, do an efielio, pray for health, so that we can get better and leave the hospital and go back home and minister to our families and praise God. This is what the prayers say. But a lot of times we don't think this way, and we think we only call the priest when death is near. And because of that, most people wait until the very, very last minute, which again is not very wise, because if you're waiting for the very last minutes or hours when a person's about to pass away, and then we expect to call the priest right away and say, okay, Father, come right now. My father or my grandparent or my sister or whoever it is has hours to live. I need you to come right away and commune them. Well, there are a number of problems there, because we're taking a massive risk, assuming that the priest can come at that moment, that they're not preoccupied with another family or another pastoral emergency. That's one thing. And the other thing, so we create like an unneeded urgency when we could have called him a couple of days before. And also, a lot of times when we're waiting until the last minute, the person who is actually going to pass away, they're not lucid, they're not able to confess, they're not able to express their wishes, they're not able to actually be fully present or awake to be able to prepare themselves for death. And that's a really, really big problem, because, a lot of times another kind of negative kind of tendency we have, especially as Greeks, is not to tell somebody they're going to die. We think that we're sparing them the heartache and the fear, and so we tell them, don't say anything to them, don't tell them, let them die peacefully. But what we're doing in that instance when we say that to them is that we are, in fact, the family, we are robbing them of a good death. We are robbing them of the possibility to repent of sins that they may have not repented for yet, or to confess things that maybe they need to confess and get off their chest that they haven't had a chance to do yet, or to receive Holy Communion lucidly and awake. And so there are a lot of things that we rob our people of by hiding the eventual outcome of their disease, or that their impending death, because we don't want to hurt their feelings, or we don't want them to get depressed. But they have a right to face death with their eyes open, and they have a right to face death on their own terms, in the sense that to be able to choose the way they want to leave this world. Like, we can't choose the way in the sense of the disease that's going to take us, or whatever other way that we're going to die. But in the instances where we are not, it's not a instant death, or an unexpected death, where we have the blessing of knowing, that is a great blessing, because we can prepare ourselves spiritually. And to take that opportunity away from people, I think is not fair to our loved ones. And so it's all these things wrapped into one. We wait until the very last minute. We don't tell them that they're going to die. We don't deal with those issues. We don't say our own goodbyes. And then we wait until the very last minute. So it's kind of like, if you know somebody, for example, has, is diagnosed with, clogged arteries, right? And the doctor says, you need to do a bypass surgery to unclog your arteries and things like that. And if you don't do it, you're going to die. And then the person says, okay, well, they just wait, and they say, I'm just going to put it off until, like, I don't want to do the surgery, and I'm going to take my chances. And then you wait, and then finally the person has a heart attack, and you call the ambulance, and the ambulance comes and tries to save the person, but the person is already gone. And then it's like blaming the paramedics who came, right? And saying they're responsible for the death of the person. That's kind of like the same type of analogy, right? That we wait until the very last minute to care for the spiritual needs of our loved ones. And then we're calling the priests, who we know there's one priest in every community. In almost every community, there's only one priest, at least in the Greek parishes. And they are responsible in many times for over 1,000 people on a myriad of different pastoral needs, whether they be crises, whether they be counseling, whether they be confession, whether they be dying or sick, whether they be the weddings. And there's so many, right? And so to kind of like expect that the priest is kind of like just sitting around doing nothing all day, and that when we call, and of course we do our best to drop everything when there's an emergency and give priority to that. But sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And then people get really upset. And they say, I can't find a priest. So granted that we as priests sometimes make mistakes as well. Sometimes we may not answer, or maybe we don't answer it fast enough, or whatever. I can't make excuses even for my own mistakes as a human being. But generally speaking, I would say that a lot of the times where I can't get to somebody in time, it's because I haven't been given enough time. That's the truth. It's somebody says, my father's dying right now, and you need to come. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm 45 minutes away on the other side of town in another hospital. As soon as I'm done here, which will be, I can't rush the family that I'm with right now because somebody's dying here, I will be there. And then I try to get there, and the person's already passed, and the family sometimes is upset. So it's a combination of a lot of factors. And I think that the best thing to do is to kind of reframe the way we view illness and the way we view every stage of life. And as soon as we get sick, we call the priest. Give him time to come and to establish that rapport with our loved one who is sick, to take that journey with them, to be able to talk to them, to counsel them, to pray with them, to read with them, just to sit and hold their hands. And if they get better, great. If they get better and they go back home, you didn't lose anything. It's just a positive, right? A good relationship with your parish priest. And if they don't get better, well, at least you have that time. And the priest has that time, and your loved one has that time to prepare themselves slowly. And so that's what I would recommend. And I think that would eliminate like 90% of all the problems that we have in regards to these types of issues. And I think things will go a lot smoother. So that's all I can say about that. I know it's a difficult and a painful issue for a lot of people. And it's even painful for us, because sometimes, like a lot of times we may know people vaguely if it's a massive parish and we don't know everybody that well, but a lot of times we know the people who are passing, and we love them, and they're part of our family, and they're part of our flock, and it pains us that we're not able to get there in time. So I think that we need to work together as families and priests and the whole church to kind of be able to be organized properly, so we're not doing things last minute, and so that we can give our loved ones the appropriate time to prepare themselves for death. Those are all the questions. I'm sorry I didn't have any more. Didn't have that many coming in the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to answer them. And what we'll do is we're going to try really hard to get back onto the live shows. I promised that we were only going to have 2 or 3 pre-recorded shows in the interim as we kind of like reopen, and this kind of difficult time. I know schools are going to be opening in a couple of weeks, and there's a lot of stress there. Perhaps parents have a lot of questions and things like that from a spiritual point of view about how to handle stress with our children and things like that. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to speak with Tina Krepus and my producer, and we're going to see if we can maybe set something up maybe before school starts, maybe next week at some point. And we'll of course we'll post it on the Father TED Talks group and also on the YouTube channel. So we can maybe do a live show before the 15th, when at least here in Ontario the schools are going to be opening, and maybe especially parents could log on, and if they have any kind of questions, especially about how to prepare their children spiritually and psychologically for school. I think there's going to be some issues there, and if anybody has any questions about that, it would be good. And if you have them, if you have the questions in advance, please email them to us at FR.TEDTalks@gmail.com, so we can kind of prepare for them, especially if they're more complex questions. And we will do our best to kind of get back into a little bit of the rhythm, even though it's getting much busier these days. So God bless you. I know this video is very short, about 21 minutes, but that's okay. And hopefully we will see you before school starts, so before 2 weeks from now. Okay, so God bless you all, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Take care.